Let's begin with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, in chapter 13 of the Gospel of Mark, there's a whole bunch of parables there. And Jesus goes through most of those parables. Now, when he gets to the end, he says this to his disciples: "Have you understood all this?" They answered, "Yes." Don't believe him. And he said to them, "Therefore, every scribe who has been trained for the kingdom of heaven is like the master of a household, who brings out of his treasure what is new and what is old." Many scholars think that that's almost a self-description of Matthew himself. Sort of describes the challenge that he's up against. Remember, they had to change course real quick. It did not end up being what they thought it was going to be. And the initial message didn't get the kind of reception that they thought it should get and would get. And yet in Matthew's communities, you've got a lot of division going on. You've got some of the old guard, the people who have been around a long time. They don't like how things are unfolding right now. Their solution is, let's go back to the way it was. That's why things are so screwed up now. We lost our vision. We just went with whatever came down. We don't need Gentiles in this community, so let's not have them. We don't need Samaritans. They're not part of us. We are only for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And until we can go back the way things were, it's going to be bad. Matthew does not agree with that, even though he does agree that we can't get rid of the past. We can't go back and live there because it's gone. We can do things, you can dress up like they used to and do stuff like that. But that's not going to get you anywhere. That's not going to the past. That's just looking silly. And that's not the same thing. So he's got others in there. He's got a younger brand of Judaism. The ones who are saying, well, I thought you told us that Jesus has come and fulfilled the law and the prophets. Did you not say that? Yes, I said that. Well, did you mean it? Well, yeah, that's why I said it, because I mean it. Well, then if you really mean it, then why are you harping about we have to retain the law and the prophets? If Jesus fulfilled them, then good riddance. I never liked those purity laws anyway. Why should we go back and keep them? What does it mean if we say he's fulfilled them? Unless it means we don't have to use them anymore. Matthew understands that, but he doesn't agree with that either. He does not agree that we have to get rid of those things because that's the foundation upon which we were built, he would say. We can't just get rid of our past and think some miraculous way we're going to have a future. And then you've got some Gentiles and some Samaritans. who probably are saying, you know, we're getting tired of listening to you people bicker among yourselves. We'd like to get on with it. We like this message. We like Jesus. We like what he said. We'd like to take that and finally, let's put it into practice rather than just bickering over it day and night. And Matthew would agree with that, except it's going to be the Jews also. We're not getting rid of that. That's not going to be a change. Kind of like this scribe here. Trained for the kingdom of heaven is like a master of the household who brings out of his treasure what is new and what is old. So you have to be able to be pretty skilled in doing that. If you ever work in a community context at all, you know that you got all these divisions, and the person who has the skill to bring it all together somehow and to let us know that no, we're not throwing out our past, we're not throwing out the way we were, the beliefs that we have held, but no, we're not going to try and back up and go live the way we used to. That's not an option either. We're going to have to put our heads together and figure out how to go on, how to move on. And I suggested, well, I didn't suggest, I stole it from other people, but they suggested that Matthew's way of doing this is he has developed over a period of time kind of an outline of how we should keep going. He knows the community is in distress. No one's happy. No matter which position you take, you're not really happy. And so in some way or other, Matthew is trying to work out some kind of a program for how can we manage to get over this stuff so that we can get on with living the gospel life. And he says, let me give you at least 10 points. There could be 20 or 30 probably, but let's just look at 10. And these 10 points are aimed at how to help our community get over its anxiety, its anger, its distress. Everybody bickering at everybody else. Now, there's nothing magic, he would tell us, nothing magic about any of these, but if we take them seriously and put them into practice, Matthew is concerned they'll work, but they'll have to be put into practice. Yesterday we talked about his first one, which is know your roots. And you'll discover that that's a very important aspect of all community living. And you'll notice also today, many people in our communities do not know their roots. They do not know their history. They do not know where they've come from. They do not really know where they're headed. And if you don't know where you're headed, you'd never know if you got there or not. And that's been the problem. Where are we? Where are we supposed to be? Well, if you know your roots, and in a church setting, that means if you know what the church has stood for in the past, if you know its history, if you know the history of Christianity, then you'll know that this is by no means the worst position we've been in. This is pretty mild. We're still not killing people as they used to when they didn't agree with them doctrinally. We're not doing all the nonsense they used to do in the past, even though by our standards there's plenty of nonsense going on. But the more you know your past, the better you're going to be in a position to go into the future. We have a lot of young people where I live. We run a school and so forth. They know hardly anything about Christianity, Catholicism. It's going to be a few years as you walk through a door there, I'm going to be able to say, I remember when we went through that door, you know what we did? We took holy water. What do they do now? They take sanitizer. Well, maybe it's been blessed. I don't know. But the young people will just take that over. Yeah, that's right. That's what Jesus told us to do, sanitize. And so we do. Know your roots. Know your roots. He's got another one, the second one. You need to be able to delay gratification. Now, if you're an older person, and I become very sympathetic to older people. If you're an older person, you remember, like I'm pretty old, I remember World War II. And my parents and grandparents had just come out of a horrendous depression, economic depression. I still remember seeing coupons for getting coffee and whatnot. And once all that ended, people were buying in quantity. You know, my grandmother would buy flour in 50-pound bags. You can't use that if you live to be 300. Well, you never know when there won't be any. That was the way of living. And we had all the aftermath of war. When I was a kid, I thought every man wore on his daily dress a uniform. I couldn't wait to get mine, because that's everybody in where I lived was a man was in the war in some way or other, and they had those uniforms, and I thought that's how it's supposed to be. But obviously, I didn't know much. Delayed gratification. For those of us who are older, that's been a given forever. You don't get everything handed to you on a plate. You got to work for a few things, you know. It's not going to happen just automatically. You're going to have to learn to be patient, to wait a little bit, and try that with young people today. I ain't waiting, you know. Might die before it happened, you know. I want it, and I want it now. Well, okay, what does that mean? Well, that means I want it, and I want it now, and give it to me. So you can see you're kind of up against it. In my place where I lived, the monastery, when I entered, I was young, and there were older monks. And I always thought, you know, the problem with the older monks is that they just can't get with it. They don't know what's going on, and they're getting in the way. And they're always talking about, you know, how it used to be, and this is not really good. And they're always complaining about us younger people because we want this and we want that, and we don't want to work like they work, and we don't want to do anything, you know. They don't know what that's going to end up being, the perils of that younger generation. And I was right there. I was one of the younger ones, and I can't wait till they move on, you know. You're in the way. You're taking up space. You know, you're a nice old person, but, you know, that's it. I become one of those old people. I'm looking at these guys now, and they are totally digitized. I'm not sure there's a real person there. When you take a phone out of their ear and off the watch and off this stuff and all that, and they got everything. And you go to the abbot, what's he doing? He's been around the world 3 times in the last 2 months. Well, that's the way you do things. What do you mean it's the way you do things? Out I storm. Delay gratification. Well, Matthew thinks that's a virtue. Well, what would it look like? What do you mean, delay gratification? Well, he says here, let me show you. One of the big sections I got, one of those discourses, the first discourse, and one I think is the most important, Matthew would say, let's call it the Sermon on the Mount, because that's what it's going to be about. And I think here is where I want to show you where delay of gratification comes. The way I want to start this sermon, the way I want to begin this Sermon on the Mount, which is all about how we can live in this new reality called the kingdom of heaven. So let me set the stage for you. So he tells us this. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. So that's the way Matthew wants to begin this. He tells us some important things. There are crowds of people there, so this message that Jesus is going to preach is to a bigger audience than just the disciples. But after the crowds have assembled, then the disciples come up and they're closer. So really that means that Jesus intends this message of his to be for committed disciples. Not just those 12 or however many there might have been, but for all of us who are committed disciples, this is especially for us. He's going up on the mountain, and we know what that means. That's where authority is. We know when God likes to talk to people, to have any kind of intercommunication with them, oftentimes he invites them up on the mountain. We remember Moses especially received the 10 Commandments on top of Mount Sinai. Here Jesus on top of a mountain, undesignated, but on top of a mountain, is going to talk about the new law. Moses received the old law. Jesus is now going to talk about the new law. He sat down. His disciples came to him. Then he began to speak and taught them, saying, here's his first little thing. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. We are familiar with that structure of a sentence. It's called a beatitude. We've all heard of beatitudes. It's called a beatitude because that's the first word used. In Greek, the word is makarios. And people can argue over what does that word mean, makarios. Well, if you look in all the places where they tell you what these things mean, they'll say, well, it could mean blessed. That's one way of expressing a person who is, a makarios is a person who is blessed. It also really wants to capture an element of being happy. So you could say happy is what that word means, but in so many of our Western cultures, that word happy doesn't have the kind of seriousness that maybe blessed has. So while it would be still accurate to say happy, a lot of places, a lot of translators don't want to use that, so they don't. Fortunate, some say that's really what it means. You are fortunate. Thank God you are. But that has some downside too. So we don't know exactly. My Bible says blessed. That's what most people will talk about. What does it mean to be blessed? Well, it means to have favor with God. A person who is blessed is in a right relationship with God. That's why you're blessed. And all these Beatitudes have two parts. The first part designates what the situation is. What is your current reality? Blessed are the poor in spirit. So poverty in spirit is the reality. And what is the future? That's the second part. For theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Most people say this first beatitude is the most important. Some would say all the others that follow really are in some way or other ramifications of this first one. So you need to spend a little time on this first one. Poor in spirit. What do you suppose that means? The Gospel of Luke has Beatitudes also. Not as many, but he has them. And he doesn't use the word poor in spirit. He just says, blessed are the poor. And he says that because his community is loaded with poor people. And so he's not interested in talking about some watered down version of poverty. For St. Luke, poverty is a curse. It's something that needs to be done away with. A person who is factually poor does not have access to the necessities of life to be living in any kind of quality of life. And so he knows all of that. Matthew's community, however, is closer to middle class. And so he doesn't have a whole bunch of poor people to direct this to. And some will criticize Matthew saying, see, he's going to modify it already. He's going to water it down. It's really not blessed are the poor. It's the kind of who think about being poor, the poor in spirit. Well, that's not true. What Matthew wants to do is to say, we're not going to limit this simply to those who suffer material poverty. We are going to include them, obviously. But a person who is poor in spirit is a person who realizes that no matter what people have told them or what they have thought themselves, they cannot make it alone. You cannot make it independent of who God is and what God is about. Those people who take that on and who decide, I will be my own director, I will make it myself. I don't need other people. I don't need God. I have all I need to do this. And there are a lot of people that do think that way. Why wouldn't we ever turn on television? What do they tell you? You can be anything you want to be. You can do anything you want to do. The world is unlimited. You can have it all if only you'll use this deodorant. If only you'll buy these shoes. If only you'll use this, whatever in God's name it is or selling, you'll be perfect. And then remember what makes it so silly is down at the bottom at the end in a real quick voice, they tell you all the side effects. You would say, who in God's name would take that? You know, everything short of death, but beware. So, poverty of spirit. Those of us who know how feeble our own abilities to make our life work, how difficult that is. We are poor in spirit. Because it takes a long time for us to discover we can't do this on our own. Christianity from the very beginning knew this. And so wisely, Christianity from the very beginning adopted a communal structure of life, meaning Christianity really only works when we do it together. It's not going to work when we just go off separately and say, well, I've got my little teachings of Jesus. That's all I need. I'm out of here and I'll go over here and do it myself. I'll do it the way I want to do it. It won't ever work that way. Those who have tried it have failed, and they fail because by nature that's not how Christianity works. It's a communal religion. We depend on one another. And the gospel, and what Matthew would want to say is when you realize that, when you realize how important other people are for our own well-being, both in terms of whom we can help and who can help us. When we understand that and live accordingly, then Matthew would say the quality of our life will improve. Well, how much will it improve? Almost perfectly. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. In Matthew's understanding, it doesn't get any better than that. The ultimate goal of every Christian would be to live in the kingdom of heaven. Now remember what Matthew tells us about that kingdom of heaven. It's really the radical presence of God here on earth. But the reason he's talking about delaying gratification is because we're not going to get there immediately. What Matthew wants to tell us, because that's what Jesus actually said, was there are aspects of this kingdom of heaven that are currently right here available to us. Most of us live according to the dictates of what they would call the kingdom of Caesar. Free market capitalism is a freedom of, is sort of the way, the kingdom of Caesar, where we're told we can have it all. It all belongs to us. Everything is unlimited. Make all you can. And if you don't put your efforts to it, that's your fault, because all you have to do to be successful is just have enough money and enough technology and the gumption to get out there and do it and make it happen, and you can't. That's the kingdom of Caesar. Here in the Western Hemisphere, it's killing us. And all over the world where it's adopted like that, we're looking around and we're wondering, how long can this last? When is it finally going to end up? And we got these huge, powerful nations capable of blowing all of us up millions of times. And they're arguing over land and this and who's right and who's wrong. And the result is, of course, in almost every country, lots of suffering is going on. My country where I live, we are so in love with the gun that every day when you open up the newspaper, you don't even look at it anymore. 15 people killed here, 3 people killed here, Nashville, all over the place. You say, maybe, wouldn't you think? They're all using guns. If we kind of thought about maybe not having guns like that. No, that's a right. We got a right to have a gun. I think we ought to have them, carry them out loud so other people can see them, You go to churches now and they have to have signs on the door. No guns allowed. Can you imagine that? Well, that's the kingdom of Caesar. We're all subject to it. Well, can you do anything about it? Matthew would say yes. You can look at the kingdom of heaven as an alternative way. Now, it's not perfect yet because it's still got some to go, but it is available to us. And if we can come together as Christians with our common commitment to the gospel as Jesus unfolds it, based on the primary teaching of we love one another as we love ourselves, caring for our neighbor. If we put that into practice and learn how to love one another rather than hate one another, our lives can change. But you have to do something. You can't just say, let's think about the kingdom of heaven. I don't do it. Go home and think about the kingdom of heaven. Oh, okay, I went home and I thought about the kingdom of heaven. Well, what happened? Well, nothing. I just thought about it. Yeah, well, there, see? You have to do something. That's a big point in Matthew's gospel. And one of the things you have to do is to understand it will not all happen overnight. So don't expect miraculous things to turn around. But if you keep at it, and that's his point, if you keep at it and you delay the gratification, you know that it's going to take a lot of struggle in the here and now before I can get to the then and there. But the promise of Jesus, and here it's a matter of would we have faith in what he promises. The promise of Jesus is if you keep at this, you will get there. If you keep at this, you will get there. Blessed are the poor in spirit. And that takes a long time to get to poverty of spirit, realizing how much I need other people. I cannot do this by myself. For theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn. So mourning is one of these elements. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. There's a lot of interesting research going on about mourning, why we mourn, how we mourn, what happens if we don't mourn. I have a job. It's a job that was designed for old people. They used to call it the porter of the monastery. They said, pick some old guy who can't get out much, but he can answer the door if somebody knocks, and he can say, peace be with you, and he won't get in any trouble. He'll let the people in, go about his business. If you got one of those, let him be the porter. That's me. But it doesn't quite work that way. I'm really the chaplain to our guest house. And amongst the many things you have to do if you're the chaplain to the guest house, you do directed retreats, you do a lot of spiritual direction. And then you have what I call walk-ons. These are people who don't tell you they're coming. They might not even know they were coming. But they end up there at the door, and invariably they'll look in, and they'll say, can I talk to you? And I'll say, well, sure. And then what you hear is pretty amazing. Now, I never hung out there much before I got this job, so I didn't know what went on there. But I've learned a lot in the time that I've had it. And you find that people come who are just consumed with anger. People come who are consumed with grief. People are coming now whose husband and wife, they had a wonderful marriage, and one or the other now has contacted Alzheimer's. And the whole thing is it's a whole new way of living now, what to do, why this happened, how it happened, that sort of thing. The other day I had a young father come in and said, today I had to call the police on my 15-year-old daughter for about the 10th time. I have no idea what to do about that. Like I did. So, one of the things about all of this, when you start, well, how have you thought about this, you know? Rather than just try to cure it, have you thought about, you know, I've got to be more in touch with how much this is hurting me, how much I'm missing whatever it is that's out there, how much the pain is that I'm trying to carry around and act like there's nothing to it. Unless we are willing to mourn our losses, we'll never get over it. We'll carry them with us, and the ultimate result generally is sort of a level of anger that we carry with us everywhere. We've all run into people like that. You know, they're just perpetually angry. And you wonder, well, why would you want to be like that? Is that good? Well, I don't know. Make it, you know. You think you could ever get over it? How are you going to just mourning a little bit? Have you ever tried crying? That's a good thing. Have you ever done? No. Men, of course. No. So, mourning. Matthew knows about that. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Notice the way it works. If you can mourn, you can be comforted. And I know that is a big issue with lots of people. When I was going through theology, studying theology, the Second Vatican Council was underway. Most exciting time in my whole life. I thought it's never going to get any better than this. And we were getting that new stuff as it was being printed, and we just thought that it was wonderful. And lots of confusion, but we were young, we liked that. Lots of confusion, people getting upset, the old people didn't like it, that didn't bother us. We were going on. We got a new vision, a new church, a new way of life. It's all going to be wonderful. And then it all kind of seems like it fell apart. And you can't figure out, how did it fall apart? Who got in charge? What's the deal? And they promised us this and this, and now there's nothing there. And people want to move backwards and so forth. We got pretty angry, my group. We got pretty angry at our leadership. We thought it was terrible. We didn't like the way they were trying to move things backwards. We didn't like the way they got into power and stayed into power. We didn't like the fact that loyalty seemed to be the great thing. If you were loyal, you were good. Not if you were accurate or smart or heroic or any of those things, just loyal. You can be loyal, that's good. And so, a lot of guys my age left during that time. It was like a revolving door. You know, you didn't know who's in and who's out. We had to do a lot of mourning. Interestingly enough, the person who has been really instrumental in helping people my age anyway get over that anger is Pope Francis. When he first came into office, it was quite obvious when he didn't grab hold of that big papal stole and do the jargon he was supposed to do, but he just sort of walked out there and, oh, hello, pray for me, I'm going to need it, like this. I'm just, you know, is that the Pope? Popes don't do that. Well, he did. And then the first thing he talked about, first big issue he dealt with, mercy. He taught us about mercy. And mercy is a key factor in learning how to mourn. A lot of us need to mourn. Mourning is a good thing because it leads to comfort. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Most of us don't like that word meek. It doesn't have any strength to it, you know. Nobody would really feel complimented if I came up to you and said, you know, you look at me like you're really meek. Really? Smack. I can hear it now. Some say, if you understand that Greek word, a better way of talking about being meek is being nonviolent. Meekness, as it is understood in the Bible, certainly in the New Testament, what it's trying to get at are those people who refuse to fight back with any form of violence. And we know from our history, there have been people in the past who have heroically refused to fight back, have refused to get involved in violence. Sometimes it has cost them their lives, many times. But it was so important. These are the people, Jesus says, these are the people who will inherit the earth. The earth is meant for nonviolence. And there again, we who live in the Western Hemisphere, if you have the courage to turn on your TV to one of those 24-hour news things, you don't hear much about meekness. You don't hear much about nonviolence. What you do hear about, and they'll show you pictures, violence almost on every level. What are we supposed to do about that? The first thing generally we do about it is say, I can't do anything about it. Well, that might be true physically, that you can't get in there and stop it. But maybe even attitudinally, our approach to violence, how much should we tolerate as a community? How much should we allow to happen? When is more than enough already here? When do we say, we're not going to live like that anymore? What are people after who live a constant life of violence? Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. It's going to take the meek to get us to have an earth to inherit. Here's one of Matthew's favorites. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Righteousness, that right relationship with God. Blessed are those who hunger for that. Righteousness, justice. And notice he uses, the two verbs he uses, hunger and thirst. Remember, these are aspects of our life that we have to have. We have to have water and we have to have food, or we will die. And so it's understood, if we are hungering and thirsting for justice, for righteousness, we must have the understanding, without righteousness, without justice, we will die. We will die. Where do you go today to find righteousness? Where is justice? Do people hunger for that, really? Do they thirst for that? Do we hunger and thirst for that? At the end of these Beatitudes, Matthew will add kind of a repetition of this to show you. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Another way of talking about mercy, of course, is forgiveness. You know, a person who is merciful is a person who can forgive. Forgiving is a big issue. It's a very difficult thing to know how to forgive. Now, I like mercy. I want you to be merciful with me, certainly. But I'm going to have a tough time forgiving you. Because forgiveness doesn't depend on whether or not you have earned any of it or deserve it. Most of the time, when we're talking about forgiveness, it's our attitude that says, I will forgive you. I will show you mercy, even though you haven't changed. Even though I do not believe you deserve it. It's not a matter of what you deserve or not deserve. This is a free gift. I'm just going to let it go. I'm going to forgive you. No strings attached. That's pretty hard. Most of the time we'll say, I might be willing to forgive you if you jump through these hoops. If you show me you've earned it. Yet when God talks to us and shows us, for example, read Psalm 32 sometime, in the book of Exodus, God's self-definition is mercy and forgiveness. Mercy and forgiveness. That's the self-definition of God. That's what we should be. Merciful and forgiving. And the Psalm 32 says, God gives that to us simply when we ask. If we ask God for mercy and forgiveness, God will give it to us. No questions asked. Yeah, but why keep doing the same old stuff over? God's going to get tired of that. Well, that's not what God said. God said, you come and you tell me that, and you're forgiven. A lot of us don't believe that because that's not how we act. But if you believe the Scriptures, that's what it says. Mercy. And the result, if you give mercy, you get mercy. That sounds like a deal to me. Except, of course, the giving of mercy. That's the harder one to do. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Monastic tradition, the old monastic tradition, loved this beatitude because they saw this sort of as at the heart of what monastic life was about. Monastic life is usually defined as the desire for a person, a man or woman, to search and find God. Whatever it takes to seek out and find God, you dedicate your whole life to doing that. And it's understood, of course, that to get in a position where you can finally find or see God, you have to have a pure heart. The heart was understood to be the seat of life. It's the organ that pumps the blood where it needs to go. And we all know how important that is. But here, purity of heart means that we cleanse our lives to the degree that our vision becomes clear. We can finally see that for which we have been searching all these years. And the thing is, where we start with that purity of heart? Ourselves. We have to purify our heart before we can see what's out there. And it's that God that's out there that we want to see so desperately. And yet we go out there and try to fix that out there, whereas we need to fix this in here. Purity of heart. For you will see God. They will see God. Another favorite of Matthew. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Children of God is a term that the Bible uses quite often to talk about the relationship of a believer to God. It's not an infant kind of a designation or a little kid or something, but a child of God is somebody who has an intimate relationship with God, like a child would have with a parent. So to be a child of God is a good thing. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Well, certainly that's something we need. Peacemaking. How do you make peace? Peace. Well, maybe one thing might be to understand what peace really is. Peace is not necessarily the absence of strife. Peace, as the Old Testament would call it, shalom, that means wholeness, completeness. We are at peace when all the pieces fit. And the problem with most of us have is we're not at peace because the pieces are not fitting very well at all, and we haven't done anything to see that that works. So we cannot be peacemakers unless we are at peace. And all you have to do, once again, look at our world. What do we need? We certainly need peacemakers. Who are the peacemakers? And what happens if you dedicate your life to peacemaking? The one thing you can be guaranteed, you will be disliked. People don't like peacemakers. And we don't like them because peacemakers are those folks that like to call us to accountability. Can you imagine that? Calling us to accountability. Peacemakers. Pointing out how the pieces are not fitting. Pointing out our hypocrisy, how we are saying, oh, I'm for peace. Yes, I want peace. I'll do anything for peace. Except do it. Peacemaking becomes very important. Blessed are the peacemakers, for there they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Very interesting, you begin, this is the last of the 8 Beatitudes, and you end up in the first one and the last one at the same place. The kingdom of heaven. Persecuted, not just persecuted, persecuted for righteousness, persecuted for justice. In other words, there's a huge reward for being one of these people who are willing to undergo persecution to bring about justice in our world and righteousness. And the result is going to be great. They will be the persons who enter the kingdom of heaven. Now there's an addition here. Blessed are you. Scholars point out very quickly, all these Beatitudes up until this one have been in the third person. They. Blessed are them. They will, they will, they will, they will. Now it switches to the second person plural. And it's kind of like Jesus now is looking up. He's looking directly at us, kind of maybe pointing his finger and saying, blessed are you. Now it's personal. It's not just generic they. No, blessed are you. When people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward will be great in heaven. For the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. That's personal. He's now looking right at us, telling us, you, blessed are you if you're being persecuted for righteousness. Delay gratification. This is Matthew's understanding of ways in which we can improve the life in our communities, which generally are categorized by lots of dissension. These Beatitudes are worthy of going over again. Look at them yourself, pray them, see where you fit into them, which ones are talking directly to you. What would you need to do if you decided maybe you wanted to change a little bit and become one of those blessed people, to become one of those fortunate people, to become one of those happy people? Well, this is just one of 10, but it's probably, of all the 10, the most important, the Beatitudes. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit. Thank you.